Hello, this is Braden Matson. This is the Brand Burger podcast. If you like this show or episode, please do rate it and or share it. That helps me out a ton. Also, if you want to be a guest, just drop me a line on LinkedIn and we will set it up. Thank you very much for listening. And without further ado, super stoked to get into today's episode. Let's go. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Terry Seitz. This is going to be quite an episode. He's a four-time VP advisor, currently partner and COO at the Nuance Collective. He's worked with companies like Visa, HBO, Coca-Cola. This man is a wealth of knowledge, and we're going to get quite into the weeds. So without further ado, Terry, thanks very much for coming on, and I'd love for you to say a couple more words about who you are and some of the things you think.
Thank you for having me. This is the high point. I mean, there's nothing, it's all downhill from here. This is going to be the most interesting pod ever. And I'm like, is it? No, I hope so. I hope I deliver. No, but thank you. Yeah, so who I am, to quote the Pete Townsend autobiography, if anybody is a fan of The Who, but I'm a 20-year marketing vet, largely split between ad agencies in the New York area and then, almost a baker's dozen tenure at Visa, covering all facets of the hotly debated funnel, but brand equity and awareness to performance and demand gen. I've had the fortune to cover it all. And in that sort of like arc of my 20 years, started in the agency world, went to Visa, and then now back in the agency world. And it's been fascinating because the journey is, for me, akin to this idea of moving from being a commercial artist to a mad scientist. Back in the day, if you'll forgive me, back in the day, the agency world was populated, and still is to a large extent, with writers and artists and photographers and social commentators and animators and philosophers and authors, etc. And it was this sort of like merry band of creative type artists who happened to do advertising. And they did that to satiate their soul, but also to sort of act as a catalyst and platform for their other endeavors, right? They were artists first, arguably. Obviously, the world and the plates underneath the discipline have changed with the advent of attribution and modeling and the move to digital. And so that's forced me to go from, hey, we're a bunch of commercial artists who put out campaigns and advertising where the old Wanamaker, 50% of your ad spend is wasted. We just don't know which. And it didn't matter because nobody measured it largely anyway, or had any sort of correlation to actions to outcomes. To now, we're arguably a bunch of mad scientists where the process has become much more structured, formal, rigid to some degree, overly rigid, but we're expected to move outcomes, and we're expected to communicate the approach to moving outcomes and then systematically deliver against them. And it's sort of been a fascinating career pivot for me that replicates, I think, where the industry is going and sort of all the bumps and forks in the road that have forced us to sort of change accordingly.
That distinction it's interesting. It's actually the first time, I'm still relatively young. A lot of my reference point for this is like Mad Men, right? But I've also worked in like a lot of independent performance marketing type agencies. And this kind of distinction between, and what's in my head is that like the creative work and the some at least of advertising effectiveness is driven by that. And so you need, especially in the age of AI, like you need a human brain to drive the creativity that in a lot of cases builds brand equity, to your point, and mental availability. Yeah. But then you also need the kind of, as you're calling it, like the mad scientist approach, where you need to also defend budgets in your job. Mm-hmm. And so do you think, if from a pendulum perspective, I mean, do you think that this shift to the kind of mad science era, or let's say digital era, whatever language we want to use, I mean, do you think it's harming us or not? Or do you think that's too black and white? Like, how do you see these two kind of interplaying together now?
Yeah, it's a great question. A play on words. I specifically note us as being sort of mad because we are sadistic and crazy to engage in a profession and to hang our hats, our compensation, our ratings on this idea that we can somehow certifiably link advertising or marketing actions with purchase behaviors and actions. And I know that that is a whole swath of debate, but to your question about has the pendulum swung, I think it has swung too far to, and I think we're going to get into this idea of like, are we probabilistic in our intent or are we deterministic? 20 years ago when I started in the business, there wasn't that debate because no one ever held us accountable. Now with AI and the notion of volume and content at the speed of light, coupled with attribution and marketing mix models, and the fact that the platforms basically, with the advent of digital and social, have convinced us that we can create this certifiable one-to-one connection between a marketing action and a bottom line business outcome is, I think, problematic, because that is just not how. I go back 3,000 years, and I'm going to nod to the Evidenza guys who are brilliant. I don't know if you know them, but they're a synthetic research company. They used to work at LinkedIn. But they basically say, listen, we are, as humans, a logical, non-binary, beautifully erratic, mad species. And therefore, it's quite impossible to go, I'm going to somehow create an action or a set of actions that can make sense of it all. We are beautifully illogical. And so we can get better. And that's the idea of being sort of more probabilistic in our actions and outcomes and modeling and measurement. But the pendulum, I think, has swung way too far into the deterministic space where we sit up in front of finance or the C-suite or our respective boards and go, you give me $1, I'm definitely going to give you 3 on the back end, and I can chart it back to a series of marketing endeavors. I do think, going back to the idea of being a scientist, yes, there's a formal process, right? It's about the search for truth. It's about creating hypotheses, going through a process to either confirm or debunk, and then learn and then optimize. I think that has all been good for the business. But to your very good point at the beginning, part of this idea of being mad and being a scientist, and I'm going to quote, I know we were off camera talking about Ben Scanlon's episode 32, where he was talking about being a high school, or the perils of thinking about marketing as a high school chemistry class. There is alchemy, and that's sort of the human head and the human heart that a scientist and that process is trying to use to make sense of, right? But it is about testing, but it's not about for me, it's about testing what resonates versus, Ben's point about, which I thought was a really good one, where the perils of you add an ingredient here, you add an ingredient here, you add an ingredient there, and it gives you a definitive outcome. For me, the wonderment of the lab part of being a scientist is in the alchemy and
There are at least 3 very, very juicy threads. Well, threads aren't juicy. Threads are boring, and you shouldn't eat them. But my parents' cat has a habit of eating threads. I think we're going to get into probabilism and determinism, and we'll define those terms and get into that. But before we do that, I really wanted to just marketing. So maybe let me kind of tee this up and share what's in my head. Like, there's this field that we call marketing science, and there's a portion of that, and it might even be the largest, really, where you have Ehrenberg Bass and you have a lot of these, what gets referred to basically at this point as laws. And then you have this other set of what I would call, and you've actually alluded to this before, borderline pseudoscience. And I certainly am not in the business of naming names, but I think there's a lot of, and look, I'm not a data analyst or anything like that, but I know enough to be a little dangerous. I think there's a lot of marketers who quote and cite things, or you look at even some like the advertising effectiveness and like, the impact of emotion on business outcomes, and you peel the onion a little bit and you're like, well, is this really that rigorous? But so there's kind of this landscape of marketing science, but what I'm trying to get to here is that it seems that a lot of that, or some of that, kind of a la Byron Sharp, for example. I'm a big fan of his work, but it almost wants to be or seems to be predicated on the opposite of what you're saying, which is that we actually can have a marketing theory of everything. And my perspective is that we can't. Like, some brands just take off and start resonating to your language, and we honestly just don't know why. But there's almost like this area of marketing science where we're we're starting to say, no, like, these are laws. They're like the laws of physics. There's no mystery, really. We understand all of it. And I think that's evidenza. And I respect those guys, but it is predicated kind of on this notion that, like, human beings are a bit, let's say, not deterministic, but like we can just do this in a lab. And so are you coming at this from the perspective that ultimately, because we're talking about probabilistic tendencies in markets, in human beings, we can't have a marketing theory of everything, and it would be wrong to kind of approach marketing science with this very, like, law-like, let's say, methodology or perspective? I'm sure you're picking up what I'm putting down. It's a little broad, but I wanted to drill into this a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, you're giving me heart palpitations, because at its very core, you're questioning marketing's remit in a way. Like, what are we doing all day? Like, what's our purpose? I agree that that we probably should not think about these things as laws and dogmatic ones that need to be adhered to. To your point, there's so many, whether it's the Ehrenberg guys, right, which all the folks you just referenced, and you throw Ritson in there, right, and you throw Tyndall in there, and the System 1 guys, right, and then you got other guys on the fringe, Richard Shotton, and right, behavior science, and all that stuff. I don't believe that those. I think that we should view these things as guidelines and signals, because I go back to humans are illogical, irrational, non-binary in how they make decisions. Like, I go all the way back to Simon Sinek, right, who is like, if you believe him, do you know who he is?
I do.
Right, the TED guy, right, and he's got the optimism company, right, and he talks about people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it, whether or not you believe in that premise. His point, or his substantiation, is people make purchase decisions, be it in the B2B or B2C space, based on emotion, like the limbic part of the brain, and then it's like rationalized thereafter in the neocortex. Again, whether or not you believe any of this, it's, for me, again, thinking about the arc of the last 20 years and where we are, and your question, we're trying to make better guesses and better investment choices. But I think, to your very good point, we have to stop the crazy of we can be deterministic about all of these things. We can't, but should, and this goes back to the sort of the lab and the science part, should we try and understand the signals that are going to give us a better probability of a bottom line business outcome based on our marketing activities? Like, absolutely. I don't think we should revert back to 30 years ago, or Wanamaker, or 100 years ago, where we're like, well, we're just going to do a bunch of stuff, and who the hell knows if it's going to, right? Like, we are so far from that, particularly now, and with the advent of AI, we're never getting out of that space. And so, how do we use that space and optimize it accordingly? But yeah, like, I worry, and I have a client that we're helping to do some board level analysis and updates on, that either we're not getting a seat at marketing's not getting a seat at the adult table, because people don't trust us, because they're like, historically, you either didn't measure anything, or now you've tried to convince us that you can, but you're basing your metrics on a bunch of like vanity things, like CTR and followers, and or things like ROAS and ROI, which don't actually give you an indication of what's likely to work in the future, but are backward-looking efficiency metrics, right? So we've created this problem. Now, we're all running around trying to sort it out, but I go back to, you got to think about the laws as guidelines and more as a signal versus go. And John Dawes, and you got to adhere to the 95-5 theory. I'm a believer in that. In a way, sorry, and then I will wrap this up. This is about like common sense. Right? If you think about Ehrenberg Bass and you think about John Dawson, you think about Everson and all those guys, it's just like it's a pivot back to being common sense marketers, which is a combination of things like building brands over time, but yet converting short-term, lead gen and demand. Like that's just common sense. Whether you roll it up in some piece of research, you're like, yeah, that's, that seemingly makes sense given the non-binary, illogical, or rational nature of human beings. Sorry, that was like the longest.
No.
I knew when we started this that we were going to.
This is why I do this. I mean, what are we, 20 minutes in? It's already been a lot of fun. No, so what I was going to say is I feel very slightly vindicated because I was walking someone maybe to get a coffee or something the other day, and it just kind of popped into my head that like there's something to be said for the fact that we've so under-engineered this whole thing and we've so over-engineered it at the same time. Yes. Where like you could kind of just think like, if you deeply understand the market and your customers and needs and where people buy stuff and why they do it, like, and then run ads against that and community, not just advertising, but like, there's a degree to which this can be much simpler than we've made it out to be. But from the under engineering perspective, that's where you were getting at in terms of marketing, getting a seat at the board level because they're under engineering it. Maybe that's the wrong term, but they're, reporting on CTRs to the board makes me want to, I mean, I used to live on the 11th floor of this building, so that would have been more effective to jump out of that one. But it's like, and so anyway, that was just a thought in my head, but I did want to bring it to, before we talk about measurement and marketing's role and how to think about this at the board level in particular, because I want to, if board people or marketing people, I want both to be able to listen to this and get value from it. But before we get there, I think we need to talk about determinism up against determinism and probabilism, or is it probabilism, because that's going to tie into measurement. And to your point, like, what is marketing's job, like at the most high level? Because I think that gets profoundly misunderstood for people just listening or watching this. I think, again, just at a very high level, right? When we use these terms, most people are probably familiar, but in case you're not, especially in the context of marketing, what we mean is that deterministic just basically means there's certainty with respect to if A, then B. And, like in a philosophical sense, if someone says they're a determinist, they believe that all of their actions from the time they're born till the time they depart are predetermined just by the laws of physics. We're not here to have that debate. I, for the most part, do believe in free will, and there's some other conditions there. But the idea is that you're a wound up clock, just kind of moving your way through the universe. Now swap person for company or marketing activity, and basically you have what we mean, right? The idea is I can spend this money in these places and do these things, and it will lead to these outcomes because the underlying function is causally understood in a linear way. A causes B, causes C, causes D. Whereas probabilistic thinking is we don't have certainty, we don't have epistemic or economic certainty or philosophical certainty that the actions we're doing with A are going to cause B in the way that we know is going to play out before A happens. We're saying that A is likely to have this effect on B to this extent, and here's why, but we don't have certainty. And in a marketing context, almost all of what we do in the way that we're measured and the way that we measure ourselves and we're incentivized to measure and the way that we report is predicated on deterministic thinking. And that's the funnel. The funnel is, if this conversion rate from tofu to mofu, and if this conversion rate from mofu to bofu, and we spend this much and we get this CPA, this is how much money we're going to make. And the entire system is predicated on essentially determinism or deterministic thinking. So what I want to do, though, is drill into this. And so I guess the first thing is, I don't even know if I want to ask this, but like, why do you think we're here? And from there, I would really want to get into how, and this is where it ties into measurement, and I'm teeing this up for more than I should be speaking, but how do we begin to change the mindset of people on boards, business leaders, executives making business decisions in boardrooms. How do we connect how this actually works with the measurement so that we can have a seat at the table? So it's kind of two questions, and it was a very long tee up, but there you go.
No, first off, I think your summation and clarity to the audience around probabilistic versus deterministic theory and outcomes was fantastic. So thank you, because it tees up your initial question of like, what are we doing in marketing? And for me, and I hope for the audience, everyone understands that our remit is quite simple. It is to drive enterprise value for a company. That's it, guys. That's all we're here to do. Now, it is a quite complicated. So people are like, well, what's enterprise value? Well, enterprise value is driving profit, the margin associated with profit, growth, pricing power, and elasticity, and risk optimization for a company. All like business schooly, financy type terms, but it's about driving value for a company. It is not about pixels. It is not about great copy. It is not about great newsletters. Those are all inputs and actions to drive enterprise value for a company. We are in a business, folks, and that is what we do, whether we're internal or whether we're at an agency or a consultancy. And for me, that was, if you look at that at the North Star, you go, okay, that should organize oneself, one's beliefs, one's actions sort of accordingly. Now, the challenge is this, and this is where I feel like marketing gets unfairly indicted, to answer your second question, which is like, how did we get here where there's a divide at the CFO level, there's a divide at the board level, there's a divide at the C-suite level about marketing's contribution to enterprise value? Well, again, you go back 100 years, you go back 20, 25 years when I started, there wasn't that North Star. No one really, like theoretically, people sort of assumed that was what we were doing, but it wasn't hardened in corporate strategy, the formal remit of a marketing department or an agency. Well, that all changed when we were able to start measuring things as we moved all of our resources, investment, thinking, et cetera, online. But then we started measuring the wrong things based on what the platforms were telling us we could and should measure, which was a self-fulfilling prophecy for them, but not for us. We then went to the board, we went to the C-suite, we then went to our finance colleagues and said, look, we're going to measure vanity type metrics of like view rates and like click-through rates. And they were like, well, it's great that you can measure, but how the hell is that tracking back to enterprise value? And it doesn't. And so now we are running around like crazy trying to establish, to your very good summation points, more of the signal-based correlation, but not go all the way to causation between a marketing dollar and an action and a return. But no one's cracked that. Like, I'm going to age myself, but that's the $64,000 question. You know, one of the interesting things is a guy by the name of Jonathan Knowles, who's a marketing luminary. He worked with Chris Brugave, who was the old AB CMO, and they are trying to crack this very thing. But what Jonathan said was recently in a Marketing Week article that we have somehow convinced ourselves that a marketing investment and the return on that marketing investment can happen at the same time. And that defies, so marketing investment and return happen literally at the same time. That goes to your point about causation and one-to-one, right? That defies the laws of time, human nature, investment theory. But we have somehow signed ourselves up and communicated to the board, the CFO, C-suite, et cetera, that you give us $1 and in real time we can give you that $1.50 back. And that is just not how it works. And so we need to stop the deterministic rallying cry that we've gone to because we want to be adults and have a seat at the Thanksgiving table with the rest of the folks. Reel it back, which is your third question, which is how do we start to change these things? And I think some of it is, hey, we got to get a seat at the corporate strategy and planning table. I'm not sure that we are. We are often receivers of said strategy, but we need to be informing strategy. Two is we have to try and convince the board, et cetera, the CEO, CFO, to look at planning from a multi-year versus on a quarterly basis, because it goes back to this Jonathan Knowles point. You need time for marketing to work in the compounding effects of our investments and the content and messaging we put out. It is not a immediate return. So I think 2 is like a time continuum relative to corporate strategy. 3 is we gotta own up to, like, we've been committing foot faults in terms of how we've been measuring these things. Like we need you guys to sort of like reset and work with us to reset expectations. My last point is, and I'm going to go down a little bit of a sort of a finance businessy school rabbit hole for a second, is this goes back to this notion that I think we are unduly indicted for the expectations on marketing vis-a-vis it's the largest expense line item often in people's budgets. Therefore, we damn well better see the causation between a dollar invested and $1.50 returned. In no other facet of an organization is that causation expectation. If you think about banks or any investment strategy, there's a whole host of models: net present value, capital asset pricing, arbitrage pricing theory. These are all things, guys, you don't need to sort of know. But in the finance department, when they're thinking about making investments, right, will never tell you there is a guaranteed outcome on the back. There is no deterministic outcome on the back. Their models are predicated on risk, right? It is never 100%. And it kills me that we've somehow convinced others, or that they have expected us to be that deterministic, right? They build in risk into their models to go, I'm going to invest $10 in this real estate project. I think it's going to return 12, but I'm not going to guarantee it. But going back to your earlier point, there's a high probability based on X, Y, and Z analysis, based on the model and what it's sort of spitting out. But they'll never, or they shouldn't, because then they'd be snake oil salesmen, go to the board and say, I'm investing X in real estate and it's going to return Y. That no other function, including finance. And so I go, and this is where maybe you can make $100 million if you need a new business idea. But how do we build better financial models and marketing investment models to say, we're forward looking based on all of these activities, based on what we know about the audiences, to your point. If you give us X, if you give us $10, we think we can return 12 or 15 or whatever it is. And we're using the models that finance has created, CAPM, NPV, arbitrage, and go, we're being better educated about what we're doing, but we're not going to guarantee outcomes.
I am in violent agreement with all of that. I think which means people know what I mean by that. And I use the word violent intentionally, not physically, but mentally, right? Because it like causes pain to think about just the number of times and occasions and conversations and commentary on LinkedIn. Just if you've been doing this a while, and you've been doing it a hell of a lot longer than I have, but even like the short period of time in this space, it's like, yeah, that's why I say violent agreement. But I want to push on this, which is the example of investment, I think, is probably where the it's not, well, is it an analogy? The analogy, I think, is very, very good. It's the closest, I think, to something that the CFO can really understand, which is like we're making probabilistic asset bets, and we have reasons to conclude what we think the return is going to be. I think where it starts to break down is with just for a simple example's sake, let's say I'm going to put $1,000 of my personal money in some ETF. I don't know what it's going to return. That's like half of the problem is before I've spent the money. I don't know what it's going to return. But 9 months later, I have as close to certainty as I can have with respect to what it did return. And I think that's the part where that's the other 50%. Maybe it's 90%. I'm just kind of cutting it in half. And that's the part, I think, where, in my experience anyway, most CFOs, or a lot of CFOs, or even just CEOs who have come up through sales in particular, not necessarily marketing, no slight to them, it's just how this game works, they can more easily get on board with the first part, which is, okay, I understand what you're telling me, that marketing is, you have CapEx and OpEx, and marketing spend is going to drive enterprise value in these ways, and here's why, but I still want an ROI number. And that's where the best example about attribution that I've heard came from Steve Patty was citing someone else, and I forget who that person was, but it would be like me after 10 months of lifting weights saying, which set and which rep made this muscle look like this?
Yeah.
That's an absolutely absurd question, but really where I'm driving to here is, assuming you can get boards and executives on the same page with, before we've spent the money, or before we've increased the budget or reallocated the budget, the philosophical piece about marketing's impact on enterprise value. Let's say you've got all that in place, but there's still this expectation of, yes, but I want to know with LinkedIn brand awareness spend, I want to know with Google, I want to have a line item in the P&L, and I want to be able to see the ROI on each individual marketing line. That's the piece I'd really love to drill into.
Yeah, that was a side, because I think your weightlifting analogy is the perfect one, which is, just because we can measure it doesn't mean we should. I think you have to up-level it and aggregate the presumed ROI or the ROAS if people want to look at individual channels to sort of change the dials. But I think you have to get to a more fundamental agreement or alignment with finance on how the totality of a marketing investment over a X period of time is contributing to the enterprise value. Again, I think we get so caught up in the individual channels, and I think some of that is, again, going back to an earlier point, due to not only our need to report and desire to report and be taken, quote unquote, more seriously, but the misalignment in terms of marketing's actual impact relative to the timing demands of the street or the VC or the PE firms, who are like, listen, we got an exit. You got to figure out a way to drive the valuation of this company to X from Y, because we got an exit strategy or an exit time horizon that we're trying to meet. And there's just a huge misalignment. But for me, and it goes back to that Jonathan Knowles sort of quip or comment, marketing's ability to impact enterprise value is about compounding time and effort, and it can't be done on a quarterly basis. And I would argue that it's hard to be done on an annual basis, and no one wants to hear that, right? Again, it's this, like, to your earlier point about what are you defying the laws of? We've somehow created these expectations that we can move enterprise value much more certifiably in the short term than I think we can. And because it's still sort of a black box about what actually influences someone's behavior, someone's perception, you can't put a timestamp on that. I mean, arguably you can if you offer a discount or a coupon, right? You're converting, right, like lower level, but that gets into a whole other conversation. But if we're really thinking about driving LTV of a customer or a consumer, the time horizon becomes a very important thing to align on with the C-suite and the board and the CEO. And that's just incongruent with how we measure things now, how we report them, and then the expectations that are unfortunately placed on us. I don't know if that was an answer or a punt, but it's just, I don't have the answer, but those are some of the considerations that we should be able to navigate through as we're going back to reset marketing's remit with other functions and how we are grading ourselves.
It was an answer, and well, it's why we do this, right? If there was a theory of everything, we'd probably just stop in this field because we get bored. I mean, we have to take actions, and we have to make decisions and communicate. And I guess, let me ask you this. I'm curious, like, so, I mean, you're not going to be able to put a percentage on it, but I mean, how, like, in your experience, like, how do these conversations, I mean, you're 12 years at Visa, right? Like that's huge. Like, how do these conversations go? And I mean, I guess part of what I'm asking is, I don't think you can change the mind of someone who's pre-committed to not changing it. But I mean, it's such a it's a very crude way to ask it, but I'll do it anyway, which is like, what's your what's your conversion rate from like perspective to changed mind, if that makes sense? Like, how does this usually go, and when it goes badly, why do you think it goes badly?
At the internally, at sort of the board, CEO, CFO level, my pause is I'll give you two stories to try and answer it, but I think it is a typical, like, it depends on the organization, et cetera. So whilst at Visa, huge organization, marketing, yes, a 400-person department, but the way that the business model works is Visa makes most of its money on payment volume and basis points on payment volume. Visa doesn't actually issue cards, collect money on interest, et cetera. They are literally the payment rails. They're the software, the bed by which transactions actually happen. So it's code, it's dots, it's the software. Banks are the ones that actually issue the cards. We make a fraction, a basis point on each and every transaction that is used when you use your debit or credit or, you know, mobile app, et cetera, digital wallet. So it's a complicated model. The reason why I tee this up is because it's like a B2B2C model. It's a four-party model. And so marketing's ability to go back to this notion of how much are we contributing to the bottom line of the business isn't direct through Visa's marketing activities that drive more payment volume with each consumer. It is, but it's done through the issuance of cards. And so it's like we make an incredibly healthy margin based on the thousands of partners that issue the cards on our behalf. So to say that, like, we use the millions of cards and we're driving usage, quote unquote, and transactions, the answer is like, yes, but at a nominal rate versus if Bank of America decides to issue Visa cards, like the years made because their footprint is so incredibly massive. Now, that model and how we generally make money impacts how the marketing department is viewed internally, which isn't like, hey guys, we need to increase sales or widgets purchases by 10%. Like, that's never the conversation. The conversation is, how do we drive the equity of the brand such that we can charge premiums and higher margins to our clients who can't live without us? There's an element, yes, of we go to them and say, the strength of the Visa brand overall relative to competitors will drive theoretical consideration and preference to use the brand or to use your cards, your dear client cards, more, and therefore we're able to charge you a premium. And so we try and show, hey, if we can drive preference, consideration, affinity, badge value, all of the brand equity associations attached to Visa, then the theory is, yes, usage goes up on a consumer basis, but it's really about the clients and our relationship and ability and the deals that we are able to strike with them. That's one example. The second one is, now that I'm back in the agency world at this wonderful startup called the Nuance Collective, we are working with some clients on what to communicate to the board. And it's really interesting in that they're much more B2C models, or our clients' businesses are much more B2C models, where and a lot of them are, you know, VC, PE owned, who have exit strategies, and they're, you know, the demands, the frying pan that our clients are under is just so damn acute. What are we doing? You know, we're looking at Amazon sales on a daily basis. We're looking at Target sales on a daily basis. We're looking at Walmart sales. Why aren't we moving boxes? Why aren't we increasing sessions? And this one particular client, there's a board meeting on the 26th, and we are scripting their narrative to try and go, yes, we understand your exit strategy, your timeline, and your horizon, and where you need to get to, both from a valuation standpoint and a revenue and a sales perspective. We're going to come with it's an and proposition. We're building a brand, so there's got to be long-term acquisition and equity that will ultimately decrease your CAC, that'll increase your pricing power and elasticity, et cetera. Don't discontinue that theory, Aaron Burbass, right? Ritson, all of those guys. That said, it's got to be balanced with conversion, immediate sales, et cetera, like lower funnel stuff. So we are We are literally going back and going, here's the totality of the narrative that is an and versus an or. And we're citing guys like Ritson and the Evidenza guys and Tyndall and System One and like Karen, the Eat Big Fish and the Cost of Dull. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. Karen Nelson Fields. And we're talking about the cost of dull media and creative, because everyone now is like, just AI everything, right? Like automate it all. And it's about volume. And we're saying it's not. AI is going to help, but volume isn't the answer to your revenue or your short-term sales problem. You have to think about this sort of more holistically. It has been, to answer your question, it's been gratifying to help write the narrative to this. The board seems to be an active listener and buyer of what we're selling right now. But let's be honest, next quarter's sales are going to dictate how that narrative goes. But I feel like we've bought in with this one particular client who's amazing and lovely. Like we've bought ourselves 12, 18 months to do that. And again, it goes back to this like time continuum of like, we got to be in line with the expectations of the folks cutting the checks at the top, or else misalignment happens and CMOs get, red weddinged, and
I appreciate those examples to help ground this in reality, and I think they're very good ones. We're approaching the end, and I'm toying with what I want to close things out on. I guess so. You said something at the end there, which is alignment, which is a word that I use far more in any given day than anyone should, right? But
yes.
But I mean, what do you do if you can't get it? I mean, it's kind of similar to the question before this, but I mean, and maybe I'll just kind of answer it for myself and just like straight up get your thoughts on it, which is like, at the end of the day, you tell the truth, you say your piece, and there may be cases where you just don't see eye to eye, and then the question immediately is, well, how long you work together from that point, if at all? I mean, would you agree with that? Is that how this tends to go?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, right. There's all this chatter and fodder about the tenure of CMOs being the shortest of any in the C-suite. And that's for a variety of good reasons. But I don't think we've done the work as a function or as an industry to sum up all of this, to be better partners and better storytellers about the value that we can actually create. Like, I don't think we've done half the job. I got to quote this thing, and it drives me insane. There was a McKinsey study. It's an annual study, CMO, out of Europe, that broke in November. And they talk about the priorities for 2026. Where do you think ROI sits on the list of the top 20 priorities for CMO? ROI is a proxy for enterprise value creation. And whether or not it is, that's a whole other discussion. But where
Right.
do you think that sits? Sorry, it's a loaded question.
No, I mean, maybe it's a trick question. My intuition would be within the top 3, but I mean,
6. It's 6 after branding, budget management, not budget optimization, budget management, data privacy, authenticity, and employer branding. In
none
2026,
of those should be in the first 6. I mean, maybe a couple, but
but
come on.
That's my point, and I think it affirms your worry. Like, if ROI and enterprise value creation isn't number one, what the hell are we doing? Right? Like, how is that amongst really amazingly smart, capable, brilliant, presumed CMOs in Europe? Why is it 6? Like, do we want to continue to be relegated to the kids' table at Thanksgiving?
I'm glad you said that, because it's something that I've thought and said before, which is kind of like, look, like, guys, we're half the problem here. Like,
yes,
there's a lot of complaining about CEOs who don't get marketing or don't have the seat at the table, but it's like, yes, because, and this is something Steve Patty also said this in a podcast, I believe, with Paul Singh, who is really, really good on the positioning, on positioning and how companies communicate value through behavior and action. I would recommend listening to that one as well. But I think it was in that one where Steve pointed out that one of the things he started doing is reporting on the things that a CMO ought to do and is doing, like a CMO that knows what they're doing, to the board, so that the board realizes, oh, wait a minute, like this is marketing? I thought you got, because, and this is it, and I have to stop myself from just ranting, but it's like if you want to get a seat at the table, it's like you don't earn it just by talking about stuff or asking. Like, you need to show that this is the value you're bringing, and prove that by actually taking the action. So that's why I say, yeah, we're part of this, is that we're just doing this to ourselves, and it's a perpetual cycle, right? And this is kind of going to lead to my last. I'd love to kind of end on a positive note if possible,
Yeah.
and kind of give some advice to people. But I mean, really, that's, I think, what happens is, there's, say what you will about the study that found that like 30% of marketers couldn't name the fundamentals. That's a whole separate thing. Yada,
Yep,
four
yep.
P's, yada, yada, yada. But like, we grow up, and a lot of us come up in, Facebook ads and slot machine marketing, and we just think it's tactics, and we rise through the ranks. And then we have this whole strata of CMOs who don't know this stuff. So they don't get a seat at the table, and it just perpetuates ad infinitum forever. But I guess, where I'd love to kind of just get your thoughts and close things out is like, what advice would you give to, I mean, even people, I've been doing this a decade, but that's still early, I consider, but even people, younger than me, or just kind of figuring it out career wise, like, where do you think we need to go as a profession, and what are the things we need to start doing and learning to kind of right the ship? Because sometimes I feel like it's just game over, and I don't want to feel that way.
Yeah. Well, I think it goes back to your an earlier point you made about the fear of the discipline, and where it stands, and how serious we're taken. And the quick of it is, for new grads, and I do a lot of mentoring for folks that are just getting into the business. They're like, well, what should we do? Because it used to be like, well, I can be a copywriter, or I can be a strategist, or I can be an account, right? And all of those things are somewhat right, but not if you wanted to make a 30-year career of this. Like, that's probably not the way to go. What I say is two things. One is, and we talked about it for a long time, you need to become a subject matter expert in two things. One is corporate finance. I'm not saying you gotta go get series 7 and 6 or whatever they are, but you need to be grounded in corporate finance theory, because that's who you're ultimately reporting into, and that's the remit that we have: enterprise value creation. Two is, with the advent, the peril, the promise, etc., of AI, you better damn well become an expert in the orchestration and the system thinking and design of what AI can provide you. And again, I'm saying this to a 25-year-old. I'm saying this to someone at my advanced age. Those are the two fundamentals that I see as both deficits, but also sort of equally opportunities. I up-level that, because if I had to give a piece of advice, the reason why I think we all got into this business was our insatiable sense of curiosity. What's going to impact someone's mind and heart, right? Like, what's going to get their attention? What's going to move them to buy a box of Ritz crackers, or a soda, or life insurance, or whatever the hell it is, right? This sense of curiosity is something that should be stoked and protected. What I love about the people in the business, to end on a positive note, is at its core, we're about provocation. And that will never cease, because of the non-binary, illogical, irrational nature of human beings, and trying to move them to do something on our behalf. But that requires a sense of daring and risk and provocation that makes marketing and the mad, weird people that populate our ranks like part of their DNA. So it's a strange discipline, but the idea of provocation is so critically important to counter and question enterprise value and finance and models, to question AI and orchestrate what it's providing us and what it's able to develop on our behalf. It's to question everything. Provocation is how you get to the truth, which brings us back to being this mad scientist, which frankly is why I'm going to make 10 seconds of a plug. Like, I love the agency that I am helping to build, because we are all about that. And that is, yes, a little bit of a shill, but we are not for everybody, because we are the folks who are going to question and push and prod. We are not the like, oh, you want us to make it blue? We'll make it blue, or 6-point font, or, give us, 32 more, link page posts. We're going to ask why and what value it brings. And the Nuance Collective is so like amazing. And I don't know if we're going to be able to scale it, but we're going to die on that hill, on that provocation hill, trying. And so I would just urge everybody, whether or not you're 25 or 35 or 45 or whatever it is, to never lose that sense of curiosity and provocation.
I love it. That is the absolute perfect spot for us to, and we're going to need to do a second or third one of these. Maybe, yeah, Terry, if you can tell people, of course, you mentioned the Nuance Collective, just what that domain is, and LinkedIn as well. I know for people who are looking to reach out, is there anywhere else for people to kind of learn more about what you guys do?
Yeah, I mean, we're the nuancecollective.net. You can reach me on LinkedIn. I have the longest profile name, but it's basically, if you type in Terry Seitz, you'll find this mug. But those are the two. I have two partners, and I can also send you their contact information.
Fantastic. Well, listen, thanks again for coming on. This has been an amazing conversation. Always down to do another one of these, and thank you to everyone for listening as well.
Thank you. I appreciate the time.
That's all we've got for this one, folks. Thank you, as always, for listening and or watching. If you'd like to be a guest or you have someone in mind, please don't hesitate to reach out on LinkedIn. You can also go to bradenmatson.com. Until next time, much peace and love.